Welcome to today's class all about audiobooks. My name is Nancy Housel. I'm a librarian here at Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. And with me today is Debbie Hibbard, and Debbie is also a librarian at the Department for Libraries and Archives. And some of you may have taken classes with Debbie before. So we're going to tackle the subject of audiobooks. Now, I'll confess to not being a big audiobook user. I'm sort of moving my way into that gradually. I don't know if it's because of my age or because of where I choose to do most of my reading, but I really haven't gotten into audiobooks. I find I do better with audiobooks if it's a nonfiction topic as opposed to fiction. I was thinking about it as I was coming upstairs to the training room. I'm the kind of person that likes to skim ahead in the book to see, kind of what's going to happen or how things turn out. Now, see, I can do that, and that doesn't destroy the story for me. I can still get enjoyment out of seeing how it gets to that point. Or if I'm reading a mystery, I like to see if my idea of who the villain is, turns out to be right. So it'd be kind of hard to do, I think, with an audiobook. But I know there are a lot of you out there, and I know audiobook collections, especially here at the State Library, are really popular. So I think it's a good topic for us to talk about today. I mentioned being an English teacher, but I also taught history. So today we're going to start out with a little bit of history. So audio recordings have been around for almost 100 years. And so for a long time, the first established sound recording or audio recording was thought to be Thomas Edison in 1877. He envisioned his invention of the phonograph as a device where people could read books orally. And so his very first recording on the phonograph was a recitation of a nursery rhyme. Now we're going to try this and see if it works. I found a video of that on YouTube. So I'm going to bring up a box for you. So use your cursor to click on Thomas Edison recording in the white space. And the gray tab, Browse To, should light up. If you click there, then it will take you to YouTube, and you can hear that first sound recording by Edison. When it's through, then you'll need to X out of YouTube, and that should bring you back to today's session. Okay, everybody click Browse To. Okay, so you X out of YouTube, that should take you back to the class. So anyway, hopefully you could hear a little bit. It's a little scratchy there, but heard a little bit of music, and then you heard him kind of yelling out, Mary had a little lamb, and it sounded like some laughter or something. Recently, some historians have said that there are recordings that go back to 1860. There's been a recording found by Frenchmen. But anyway, we'll put it on Thomas Edison. But because of the technology, it really took a number of cylinders of wax in order to record an entire book. Some authors were convinced to record their titles, but most of them gave up about halfway through because it was just too time consuming. It just took too long. And so what we find is that in the late 1800s and early 1900s, most authors chose to read their books or have their books read over the radio instead of having a recording made. So there really wasn't much movement in the audiobook industry until the 1930s, when the Pratt-Smoot Act was passed that provided for recorded books for the blind. And so it was then that sort of audiobook recording kind of took off. But even that was promoted in the 1930s. It took about another 35 years for publishers to get on board. And in the 1950s, Congress extended the National Library Service for the Blind and Handicapped to children. And that is when really the audiobook industry really began to pick up steam. With the companies like Western Woods and Listening Library looking to create recordings and for quality recordings for children. So audiobook publishing kind of arrived when the National Association was created in 1987, the Audio Publishers Association. This was created and had as its goal to serve the common interest of audiobook producers as well as distributors and suppliers. And it's the Audio Publishers Association that created the term audiobook. This came into use in the 1970s when audio cassettes became popular, and that's the term that the industry prefers in talking about recordings, spoken recordings. I don't know if you ever thought about this, but there are literally thousands upon thousands of titles published every year, but very few of them actually get produced as audiobooks. Some of the things that a publisher might consider when thinking about making an audiobook of a title is how popular is the author currently or in the past. What about the quality of the text? Would it translate well to the spoken word? What kind of distinction does the characters' voices need that would make it successful to be spoken aloud? Is there some flexibility into the text that would make it easy for audio production? Books that are exciting or suspenseful in written form are likely going to transfer well to an audiobook format. Whatever weaknesses there might be in a print book are going to become more obvious if you make an audiobook of it. So difficult things producers have to include when looking at titles to transfer to audiobook is, what happens if there's supposed to be transitions between time? Or what happens if there's a change of place or setting in the story? Now, how is this going to be translated in a vocal format? Especially in nonfiction, you get a lot of extraneous materials like maps, footnotes, or illustrations. Now, how are you going to incorporate those items into a spoken recording? So once the producers decide that they are going to transfer a book into the audio format, then typically the trend these days is to try to publish the print and the audiobook simultaneously. It's not without question that a book could be printed and never have an audiobook format made. Same thing, some titles could just be issued as an audiobook and never have a print book made. So, it's sort of like a guessing game in how publishers approach producing audiobooks. So just remember that because a book does well or is popular doesn't necessarily mean that it will translate to the audiobook format very well or will be as popular as the print. Of course, the key thing in audiobooks is the narrator. Narration for audiobooks is a specialized craft. It's kind of part acting and part reading. It's sort of like combining the two together. Special attention is paid to ensure that the voice of the narrator doesn't interfere with the meaning of the story or information, and that the reader uses proper pronunciation given the context of the book. So in choosing narrators, producers look to make sure that the narrator or reader's voice matches closely with the character's age in the story, making selection of the readers of children's audiobooks especially difficult. Some publishers have actually resorted to hiring children or teen readers for children's audiobooks. A narrator is left to decide about the tone, the voice, emphasis. All that can be factors in a listener becoming involved or engaged in the story. Meaning of the story is conveyed through the voice. It's also communicated through pacing. The narrator pauses. Maybe he wants to convey meaning just as the words do. If the action is fast and action-packed, then the narrator might speed up the pacing of his action. Or he might slow down if the portion of the text is meant to be savored or is meant to evoke strong feelings in the listener. Narrating an audiobook takes a lot of clarity, a lot of strength, because it is a lot of time is involved. You have to have a lot of physical stamina. All these make up components of quality narration. Sometimes audiobooks are narrated by the author. The author is actually recapturing the emotions they experienced when they wrote their book or poem. Doesn't matter whether he or she reads as an actor would. The author is interpreting his or her own intent, not someone else's. Sometimes that can backfire because they kind of get too impassioned or too involved in the subject, and that kind of turns listeners off. Also, another particularly tricky area for narrators is if the characters have to speak with accents or dialects. Narration styles come down into one of four forms. There's fully voiced reading. This employs a delivery system where each of the the characters has a different sound. And this is the most common style that we are used to. So one character, and he uses his voice to distinguish between the characters. A fully voiced narration is especially suitable for books that contain characters that have very distinct personalities or traits. A partially voiced narration in an audiobook means that one character's voicing is unique and emphasized while all the other characters' words are read kind of in a less discernible way. Then we've got multi-voiced. Multi-voiced readings employ a whole cast of narrators to represent the characters. And then the last style of narration is unvoiced. This is one in which the narrator delivers the text in a single voice, kind of monotone, no noticeable variation, between characters or setting pace or anything. This might be maybe more for an educational type title. So narration is important. There are also important sound elements. Many audiobooks contain music and other sound elements, like for sound effects. Background music in audiobook is intended to enhance the feelings and the pace associated with the story. Kind of like what you have in the movies when you kind of hear the music. You say, oh no, something's about to happen. Or, you get something, kind of slow and sweet, to go with, an emotional scene on the screen. And it's kind of the same way music can do in audiobooks. Music can amplify the mood or level of intensity associated with a particular scene or event, can underscore the pacing of the narration and action, or it can give you a clue that something culturally significant is about to happen. Music can be used to guide the listener through transitions, such as chapter beginnings and endings, and can also help in making that transition between place and time or events in the storyline. So that's sort of the background that you would need to know about how audiobooks are created. So let's shift to audiobooks in the library world and see what we find. Throughout the rest of the presentation, we're going to look at statistics based on a survey done by Library Journal. This survey was done in 2016, and they sent out a survey to public libraries across the country asking them about their audiobook collection. So every time we see one of these slides with numbers, we're kind of going back to that 2016 survey. So in this slide, what we see is they ask questions about the size of their audiobook collection. So you can see here that most of the libraries who responded do have an audiobook collection in their libraries. Some of their collections come through various sources. Some have audiobook collections that are provided by a district. Some get theirs from the state. I imagine something similar to KDLA's circulating audiobook collection that we send out to public libraries based on a user profile, or they belong to some type of consortium that provides help with getting audiobooks. So you can see here that audiobooks accounted for a sizable number of titles. And of course, it varied based on the size of the library. So here, again, from the same survey, of great importance is the fact that most audiobook listeners prefer to borrow titles from the library Yay! Instead of purchasing them. This is really opposite to what people prefer in print and ebook titles, because print and ebook readers, by the majority, would rather purchase their books than check them out at the library. So an audiobook collection could be a big boom for your circulation if you add to it and promote it. Let's see. So here you can see the audiobook collection. Ultimately, the majority is adult titles. You can see in our circle pie chart there, 75% were adult titles, 10% were young adults, and children's were 15%. You will be able to download the slides. They will be bigger if you download the presentation than what was located in your handout. So I think that proves that audiobooks is a good part of libraries' collections. So let's talk about developing and managing a good audiobook collection. So here is more information from the same survey. So here the respondents were asked, what are important factors that influence how you select audiobooks for your collection? So here you can see that most purchase decisions were based on patron request, popularity of a print book, popularity of the author's previous works, and whether the book is unabridged or not. Now, I know the state library doesn't, for the most part, doesn't purchase fiction titles unless they are unabridged. I don't know, is that the practice in your libraries if it has audiobook collections? Do you buy things that are unabridged? You can use your chat box to let us know if you'd like to respond to that. In general, some things that you should consider when purchasing audiobooks, because as we already mentioned, not all books translate well into the audiobook format. So you've got to pay some attention to what you're doing here. So the first selection factor you want to consider is sound quality. You want to make sure the production that you're considering has consistent audio levels and sound quality. The narrator's voice should be clear and crisp. Each word should be pronounced correctly and consistently. Any background sounds or music shouldn't overpower the narrator. You want to look at the pacing. The pacing of the narration should reflect the action of the story while maintaining the interest of the listener. You know, if the title is very slow paced, you don't want to put your listeners to sleep. Okay. So another thing you want to pay attention to is variety. To maintain the interest of your listeners, you need some variety. Young people enjoy full cast recordings that include both male and female voices, music accompaniment, and sound effects. Single narrators can also create a varied atmosphere through the choices they make in pacing, inflection, or creating a distinct voice for each character. Now, if they're using inflections to do that, those inflections should have energy and emotion to convey the meaning of the text. Depending on the recording, the narrator might be a professional reader or might be a volunteer. Now, at one time, I thought, I could do that. I have good vocabulary. I speak well. I read well. But, trying to think of being a narrator as, a second job or as a job for when you retire or whatever. No, it isn't as easy as it seems. There are actually, schools that you go to in order to learn how to do that. But a lot of educational publishers of audiobooks or producers of audiobooks are some sites that offer free audiobooks rely on volunteers to read. And so you kind of have to balance whether a professional would do a better job or if the volunteer that you're using is okay. Another thing to consider, especially in educational titles, is about computer versus natural voiced audiobooks. Many ebook readers and other devices have the option where ebooks can be read aloud to listeners. That's particularly useful when an audiobook version of a title isn't available. Some of us might enjoy listening to a computer voice reading. Others might find that, too mechanical or too annoying and would much rather prefer a human voice. So again, you have to figure out what your audience, what your community would want out of that options. Okay, so if you aren't a big audiobook user, but yet you're on the committee to select those, there's help out there. So here in our survey, they asked what was their top resources for finding out or for selecting audiobooks. And here you can see the list from top to bottom. The first option was to look for professional reviews in print, followed by word of mouth from both patrons and colleagues, and information from publishers or vendors, newsletters, and websites. This is what we saw before, but I brought it back because I wanted to mention that by far most selection in libraries is done in a fiction category. Probably your fiction audiobook collection probably outnumbers what you have in terms of nonfiction. But nonfiction is something that is preferred by a lot of adults, especially males. So when building your audiobook collection, don't ignore nonfiction categories. These are the top nonfiction categories for the last few years. So in the 26%, or I guess the 21% nonfiction that we saw from the earlier slide can be divided among these categories, especially history, popular science, self-help, humor, travel, inspirational, faith-based, Christian living titles. These are all growing areas in the nonfiction sector. So one thing you can do if you don't know a lot about audiobooks or you are looking for titles to recommend is to look to see the award winners in the audiobook format. This would be a great starting place to explore notable titles. The first award for spoken recordings came from the Grammys, which is a little phonograph you see there. The Grammys Recording Academy first established a Best Performance documentary or spoken word category in the late 1950s. And typical, the nominees and winners were, comedy, storytelling performances, poetry readings, drama recordings, anything not music. So since 1958, the title of that category where we would find audiobooks has changed. The name of the award or the category has changed. Since 2006, the category has been called for audiobooks. To date, neither a children's nor young adult audiobook has ever received a Grammy Award. That's just a shame. The Audio Awards is presented by the National Association, Audio Publishers Association. Its award program goes to audiobooks and spoken word entertainment that has been issued in the U.S. They've been giving awards out since 2001. Most of their awards also go to adult titles, although there are a few categories for children and young adult literature. The Odyssey Award is another award given to audiobook production. This one is sponsored by two of the divisions of the American Library Association. This award was created in 2008, and it recognizes the producer of the best audiobook made for children and or young adults available in English in the United States. Probably less well known is the Golden Earphones that's given out by Audiophile magazine. They give to truly exceptional titles that excel in narration and style. And then we have the Listen Up, which was an award that used to be given out by Publishers Weekly. From what I saw, I think they quit giving these out like in 2013, 2014. Instead, now what they do is they sort of have a best of list that they publish, like the top 10 audiobooks of whatever the year is. So those are certainly places where you could go to get a handle on quality titles that you might want to consider for your collection. There are other areas where you can go that offer best of audiobook list throughout the year. Most of these are related to different divisions within the American Library Association. Booklist collaborates with ALA in recognizing audio awards. They have something called Voice of Choice, which recognizes outstanding audiobook readers. They usually give that out in National Audiobook Month, which is June. So there you can see three of the divisions that do have best of list in an audio format. You can go to their websites and get those, or you can access those magazines in the KYVL databases when these are published in library journals. We talked about review sources being a great way to get information about specific titles. Here are some top review sources that you'll want to keep track of if you're into audiobook selection. Audiophile is probably one of the top sources that are used for choosing for reviews and for listening to excerpts. Some others that follow that you could look at later is Audiobook Jungle, audiobook.com, Books for Ears. All of these review and give news and recent announcements and trends in the audiobook world. Here's some other review sources that you might be more familiar with. Booklist Online. I think I sign up for every newsletter that Booklist Online has. It's a great way to not only see what's up and coming that you might want to consider for purchasing for your library, but it's also a great way to keep track of things that you want to make sure you check out when your time comes. Same thing with library reviews online, library journal reviews online. Novelist Plus, which you can access through KYVL databases, also gives information about audiobooks. The thing about Novelist is that you get a lot of information about the appeal factors. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. For teen and children's titles, you've got some choices there. The School Library Journal Hornbook, School Library Collection, Voya, Teacher Librarians. Again, most of the library journals can be accessed through the KYVL databases. You don't necessarily have to subscribe to those in order to benefit from them. I put this on a special slide because this is brand new. Booklist Online has an e-newsletter that is free. You can sign up for it on the Booklist Online website. They just created a new e-newsletter, and you can see it's called All Things Audio. So you would expect that it would have articles on narrators, articles on industry trends. You can see lists, tips, news, and reviews from current titles from Booklist and Booklist Online. So that definitely, if you are an audiobook librarian or on an audiobook selection team, you want to make sure you sign up for that new newsletter if you haven't already heard about it. Okay, so kind of the opposite of purchasing things is, what happens if it's time to kind of sort through your collection and maybe get rid of some things. Weeding audiobooks really isn't that much different from weeding your print collection. You weed based on the condition, usage, and what your goals are. Some special considerations for audiobooks in particular is, are you weeding because you've run out of space? You don't have enough room to expand your audiobook collection. Are you mostly interested in what's circulating? If you do, then you run a report, choose a last circulated date. 2 years is usually a good starting point, and then you start making your choices from there. Keep in mind, who is your audience? Like, do you still have audiobooks at your library? The source I was reading in preparing today's class said the last car with an audiocassette player in it was produced in 2010. That's really not that long ago as far as cars are concerned. So you should throw out your cassettes just because it's a cassette. Think about, are they being checked out? Is your community kind of behind the times in terms of equipment or technology? Again, it's important to know who's using the collection on what kinds of devices before you make any decision to get rid of something. Certainly downloadables are picking up steam in our collections. You shouldn't weed a physical copy of something simply because you have access to a digital copy. So we've covered the aspects of kind of purchasing and maintaining your collection. Before we move on, I do want to tell you there are websites out there where you can listen to or download free audiobooks. Now, if your library is a particularly small one or a library that doesn't have a large budget to purchase audiobooks, these might be things that you want to make sure your patrons know about, especially if they're the kinds that have gone through everything that you already have at the library. There's LibriVox. It's a nonprofit initiative. It records public domain books and then releases them as free audiobooks. They have over 10,000 titles. Think kind of the classics. Titles range from War and Peace to Leaves of Grass to The Dream of the Red Chamber to Anne of Green Gables. Lit2Go is another site. It offers audiobooks, plays, short stories, and poems that are tailored for use in classrooms. Along with each free audiobook, you get citation information, playtime, and word count. So something like Shakespeare's Hamlet has an accompanying PDF document that can be used to read along with the text. Royal Books is also titles from the public domain. Open Culture says it's come through same audiobooks offered on other places online and has compiled them into one list. So you'll find many of the same classics offered elsewhere, like The Wizard of Oz, but you'll also find stories by James Baldwin, Ray Bradbury, and Virginia Woolf. You'll find poetry by Maya Angelou and Charles Bukowski. So you might even find a video of Neil Gaiman reading Coraline. Light Up Your Brain is one of the sites that are interested in providing free audiobooks for kids. They provide transcriptions of the stories so that beginning readers can read along with the audio. There are also free games that are meant to challenge the minds and to keep children's brains active. Got Project Gutenberg. Internet Archive is another one, provides a searchable list that you can go through. They have 15,000 titles. One of the best sites for free audiobooks for kids is Story Nori. It says every week Story Nori publishes a free audiobook just for kids. The audiobooks can be original stories, fairy tales, classic stories, educational books, or some small stories for very little ones. The audiobooks can be downloaded or streamed directly from the website. So lots of options there. Finding the right format. Here you can see from our library survey the formats that audiobooks have from those libraries that responded. So by and large, in 2016, library audiobook collections were still audiobook CDs, with downloading a second place. Notice here in the projection for the future that downloading picks up some, so that audiobook CDs and downloadables would be about half of the titles that you've got each. Most of us probably subscribe to a platform that provides downloadable audiobooks and ebooks for us. This is information, the results from the survey about what platforms are used. Here you can see Overdrive was the most popular downloadable platform used by over 9% of the public libraries that responded to the survey. One Click Digital and Hoopla were used by about a third of the libraries. And almost half of the libraries only used one platform. Here at the State Library, we only have one platform, which is Overdrive, which might be true of most of us since we do Overdrive through the Kentucky Libraries Unbound membership. So when listeners come to us, how do they choose what they want to listen to? Well, research tells us that audiobook listeners want the bestsellers on audio, and accordingly they reserve everything they see that they think might interest them. Many listeners follow series, so they want every title in the series, and if they're like me, it has to be in order. And dreading the day that the series ends, or even worse, the narrator changes. Still, others follow certain narrators and listen to everything that narrator does. All these listeners are easy to help up to a point. But what do we suggest while they wait for the next title in the series? Or if they've run out of titles that interest them? How do you help those that are new to audiobooks? Well, that's where your reader advisories, or in this case, listening advisory skills, come into play. In our survey, they asked how many times a week did they provide recommendations or advice to audiobook listeners. And here you can see that over half were asked to provide listening advice at least weekly. So it's definitely something that you want to sharpen your skills on. So here are some of the challenges that those libraries and librarians said they found when doing reader's advisory for audiobooks. They weren't an audiobook listener. They didn't know enough about narrators. Not having time to read or listen to everything, finding quality reviews, explaining the different formats and how each one works, or maintaining a good selection in the format that they need. I think most of us could probably say, yeah, been there. So here, in our survey, it asked them what they used for dealing with those challenges. So here you can see that on the table on the left is that what they used for sources, and most of them really don't have an audiobook expert. In other words, they don't have a go-to person on staff who's a big audiobook user. Like definitely in my library staff, they wouldn't come to me because they know I'm not a big audiobook. But we do have some big audiobook readers on our staff. On the right-hand side, it says, what sources are used to provide listening advisory to patrons? And there you can see the biggest use, of course, is word of mouth from patrons, followed by word of mouth from colleagues, and then on to review sites and even down to social media. When all else fails, we go back to those appeal factors. We've done several classes in the past about it's not enough just to say, what do you want to read or what do you like to read? We need to ask questions that tells us how what they read impacts their lives, what kind of emotion or mood it evokes. And these are the areas that particularly pertain to audiobook formats: tone, language, characterization, frame, and pacing. Tone, of course, is about the narrators creating moods, whatever they may be. Language, we're talking about, correct pronunciation, about correctly portraying accents for a character identity, talking about whether you use a single reader or a small group or a full cast of readers, about background and setting. The narrator can help establish geographical settings, maybe with a dialect or accent. Narrators are called upon to recount extensive background details while still having to maintain listener interest. Pacing we talked about earlier, and about speeding up if it was suspenseful or slowing down for something that was meant to be pondered or savored for an emotional impact. So all of these things are important to our listeners, and therefore it's worth a question when we talk to our readers about what they're looking for. One of the best things I've come across in terms of appeal factors is this novelist publication called The Secret Language of Books. It talks about appeal factors, and if you can kind of see the white page behind there, it gives you a whole list of terms and at what age levels they apply to based on appeal factors. There is a section in here just for audiobooks or audio listening. And the key things this points out is that all audio terms apply to all audiobooks at any reading level. Not sure where to start? If you aren't an audiobook reader, this would be a good thing. Start with well-characterized narration or audiobooks. It's always a good choice because those that are well-characterized are generally of a high quality. This you can download a PDF copy of, or you can request a print copy from Novelist website. Here's an example of kind of what you could do if you ask a listener that the narrator is most important to them. But these are terms you could take out of The Secret Language of Books to see what kind of narrator they're looking for. If they're the type that likes a lot of extras, a lot of showbiz, in the narration, then these are things that you could ask about. And then if they're looking for something kind of more subtle that sets a mood or evokes a feeling, these are some terms you could introduce in your listening advisory conversation with the patron. We are getting close to our time. Let me just say that it doesn't do much good to develop your collection if you don't promote and market it. In our survey, only 14% said that they actually did programming that was specific to audiobooks. So on the next 3 slides, just have some ideas of what you can do to highlight audiobook collection in your libraries. Maybe you have done some of these before. Share audiobooks with other types of libraries. For example, if you have a large enough collection in your public library, maybe you might want to share some teen titles or children's titles with school libraries. Use audiobooks in your story time hour. Encourage family listening activities. Have recommendation lists on your website, social media, at the circulation desk. Target reluctant readers. Use audiobooks in your book club. Have a gadget petting zoo for those that might be new to the world of downloading. That way they could see how the gadget works with somebody there to help them and explain all the different terminology they might be unfamiliar with. Make audiobooks an important part of your summer reading program. Host a narrator event. Highlight audiobooks in all your newsletters, websites, social media. Use audio clips in book talks. Check to see if there are marketing materials you can use from your publisher of the audiobooks and from the Audiobook Publishers Association. Had to get that out. Okay, so we're getting down to the end. Just want to remind you that we are here to help you with advice. We're here to help you with circulating collections, kits that do come with audiobooks if they're available. So if you have any questions about that, just call into the reference line. We'll get you to the right person. Want to remind you that you will get a training certificate for attending today's session. It'll come by email. May take a couple of weeks to get to you. Today's session was recorded and will be archived along with other trainings in the past. Check training events calendar for upcoming topics. Funding for today's training was provided by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We especially thank them, or we would not be able to provide this service for you. So the final thing that we need to do today is take the survey for today. Let me call it up. Okay, so this is like our Thomas Edison clip. If you use your cursor and click on All About Audiobooks. Wait, that's not the survey. Never mind. We'll come back to that. Sorry. All right, here's the survey. There we go. Click on, in the white box, All About Audiobooks survey. If you do, then hit Browse To, and it will take you to the survey for today. We'd like you to do that before you check out or leave today's session, so you can go ahead and do that. Well, I think it's just 4 or 5 questions, and I will bring up okay, let me move this out of the way. Okay. So the other striped box I put up there is where you can download today's presentation. If you put your cursor on All About Audiobook Slides and click, then the button will come up to where you can download the file and then just follow the instructions to save it where you want to put it. That is it for us today. We appreciate your attendance. Hope you learned something that sharpened your listening advisory skills. When you're ready to leave, click the red X in the upper right-hand corner, and that will get you back to your desktop. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the day, and have a good weekend.